Please don't skip. My girlfriend dumped me at my lowest. Then I came back with a life she couldn't imagine. I lost my girlfriend, my direction, and almost myself. This is how I slowly built everything back. I still remember the exact day everything fell apart. Not in some dramatic movie-style explosion, but in a quiet, almost ordinary way that somehow made it hurt even more. Because there was no big fight, no screaming, just a slow, suffocating realization that the person I thought would stay wasn't going to anymore. And the worst part was the timing, because I was already at my lowest. The kind of low where getting out of bed feels like a task, where your phone stays silent for hours and you don't even have the energy to care, where your own thoughts start turning against you. And that's exactly when she chose to leave. Or maybe that's when I finally realized she had already left long before she said the words. We were sitting in her car outside a cafe we used to love, and I could tell something was off because she wouldn't look at me. She kept adjusting the radio, checking her phone, anything but meeting my eyes. And when she finally spoke, it was soft, almost rehearsed, like she had practiced it in her head 100 times. She said she needed space, that she felt like we were on different paths, that she didn't think she could be there for me the way I need it right now. And I remember just sitting there, nodding like I understood, even though inside it felt like something had cracked open. Because I didn't need perfect. I didn't need her to fix my life. I just needed her to stay. But she didn't. And just like that, it was over. No big scene, no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet ending that somehow echoed louder than anything else. And I walked home that day feeling smaller than I ever had before, like I had lost not just her, but also whatever version of myself existed when she was around. And the days that followed were worse than I expected, because it wasn't just heartbreak, it was everything else piled on top. My career was going nowhere, I had failed an important exam I had spent months preparing for, my friends were busy with their own lives, and suddenly I had too much time to think. And thinking was dangerous, because my mind kept replaying everything, every conversation, every moment, every sign I might have missed. And I started blaming myself for everything. Maybe I was too needy. Maybe I wasn't successful enough. Maybe I wasn't enough in general. And that thought stuck with me more than anything else, that I just wasn't enough. And for a while, I let that define me. I stopped trying, I stopped caring, I let days blur into each other, waking up late, scrolling endlessly, eating whatever was easy, ignoring calls, ignoring responsibilities, just existing in this dull, heavy state where nothing felt worth the effort. And honestly, I don't even know what changed. There wasn't some magical turning point, no sudden burst of motivation. It was more like a slow irritation building up, a quiet voice in the back of my head that got louder over time, asking me if this was really it, if I was just going to stay like this forever, stuck in the same place, defined by one person leaving. And one day, I just got tired of that feeling, tired of being stuck, tired of feeling like my life had ended when it clearly hadn't. So I did something small, something almost insignificant. I went for a walk. And it wasn't some life-changing moment. I didn't suddenly feel better, but it was different. It was movement. And that mattered, because it was the first step in a direction that wasn't backward. And from there, I started doing more small things. Waking up a little earlier, cleaning my room, making a simple plan for the day. Nothing ambitious, just enough to feel like I was doing something. And slowly, very slowly, things started to shift. Not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, almost unnoticed progression. I started working out, at first just basic exercises at home, then eventually joining a gym. Not because I wanted some transformation, but because it gave me structure. It gave me a reason to get up. And over time, I started to see changes, not just physically, but mentally. I felt stronger, more in control, like I was building something instead of just waiting for things to happen. And at the same time, I revisited my career goals, the ones I had almost given up on. And this time, I approached them differently. I stopped thinking about instant success and focused on consistency instead. Studying a little every day, learning new skills, applying for opportunities even when I didn't feel ready. And there were rejections, a lot of them, but they didn't hit the same way anymore because I wasn't tying my entire self-worth to each outcome. I was just moving forward, step by step. And months passed like this, each day adding a small piece to something bigger, something I couldn't fully see yet but could feel growing. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about her as much, not because I forced myself to forget, but because my life started to fill up with other things, better things, new routines, new goals, new people. And then one day, almost a year later, something happened that felt surreal in the most unexpected way. I ran into her, completely by accident, at a place I never thought I'd see her again. And for a moment, everything froze, not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, heavy way where time feels slightly off. And she looked at me differently. I could see it in her eyes, the surprise, the curiosity, maybe even a bit of disbelief. And we talked, just casually at first, catching up, asking the usual questions, but there was something underneath it, something unspoken, because I wasn't the same person she had left. And I don't just mean physically, although yes, I looked better, healthier, more put together, but it was more than that. It was the way I carried myself, the way I spoke, the way I didn't seem like I needed anything from her anymore. And I could tell she noticed because she kept asking questions about my work, my routine, my plans, things she never seemed that interested in before. And at some point she said something that stuck with me. She said she was proud of me. And maybe a year ago that would have meant everything, but in that moment it just felt like a nice comment, nothing more, because I had already learned to be proud of myself without needing it from her. And then she said she missed what we had, and for a second I felt that old pull trying to come back, but it didn't land the same way, because I had changed, not just on the surface, but in how I saw things, how I valued myself. And I realized something very clearly in that moment. I didn't need to go back. Not because she was a bad person, but because that chapter of my life had served its purpose. It had broken me, yes, but it had also forced me to rebuild. And the person I had become wasn't someone who needed validation from the past. And so I smiled, genuinely, and told her I hoped she was doing well. And that was it. No dramatic closure, no big speech, just a quiet understanding that we were no longer part of each other's stories. And as I walked away, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. I just felt something simple and rare, peace, because I had come back, not for her, not to prove anything, but for myself, and the life I had built was something she couldn't imagine, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine, created from the lowest point I had ever known, and that made it worth everything.
That morning didn't feel special in the moment. It wasn't like some movie scene where everything suddenly makes sense and you feel reborn. It was quiet, slightly uncomfortable, and honestly a bit pointless at first. I just walked without knowing where I was going, hands in my pockets, mind still heavy, but there was something different about not being inside my room. Something about moving even when I didn't feel like it that created a small crack in the routine I had trapped myself in. And I didn't realize it then, but that crack was important, because once something breaks the pattern, even slightly, it becomes easier to break it again. And that's exactly what happened. The next day I didn't wake up early again. I went back to my usual habits, but now there was this memory of that walk. This tiny reminder that I could do something different, and a couple days later I did it again, not out of motivation, but almost out of curiosity, like testing if that small shift could happen again, and slowly, without forcing it, those walks became a part of my routine. Not every day, not perfectly consistent, but often enough to start creating a sense of structure. And structure was something I hadn't had in a long time. And once that started, other small changes followed. I cleaned my room one afternoon, not fully, just enough to make it feel less suffocating, and it sounds small, but when you've been living in chaos, even a small sense of order feels like progress, and that feeling, that slight sense of control, became addictive in a healthy way. It made me want to do a little more, not everything at once, just one more thing, and that's how I approached everything after that. Not big goals, not unrealistic expectations, just small actions repeated over time. I started setting simple tasks for myself. Wake up before a certain time, go for a walk, spend an hour studying, nothing intense, just manageable steps that didn't overwhelm me. And at first it felt forced, like I was pretending to be someone who had their life together. But over time it started to feel more natural, like I was slowly becoming that person instead of pretending. And one of the biggest shifts came when I decided to start working out. Not because I was chasing some ideal body or trying to prove anything to anyone, but because I needed something physical, something that required effort, something that would remind me that I could still push myself even when I didn't feel like it. And the first few weeks were terrible. I was weak, inconsistent, easily tired, and it was frustrating, but unlike before, I didn't quit, because this time I wasn't chasing quick results, I was just showing up, and that became my focus, just showing up, even on days when I didn't feel like it, even when my mind was telling me it didn't matter. I showed up anyway, and slowly, I started to notice changes, not dramatic transformations, but small improvements, a bit more strength, a bit more energy, a slightly better mood, and those small improvements started stacking up, creating a sense of momentum that I hadn't felt in a long time, and that momentum started affecting other areas of my life too. I went back to studying seriously, not with pressure, but with consistency, focusing on understanding rather than just passing, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I was actually making progress, even if it was slow. And I also started reconnecting with people, not all at once, but gradually, replying to messages I had ignored, meeting a friend for coffee, having simple conversations that didn't revolve around my problems, and it reminded me that there was still a world outside my own head, a world that didn't revolve around my past, and that was important, because for so long I had been stuck in that past, replaying it, analyzing it, letting it define me. But now I was slowly creating new experiences, new memories, new versions of myself that had nothing to do with her. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about replacing, not in a way where you erase what happened, but in a way where your life becomes so full of new things that the old pain doesn't take up as much space anymore. And that's exactly what started happening. I thought about her less, not because I forced myself to stop, but because I had other things to think about, my routine, my progress, my goals, and even when she did cross my mind, it didn't hit the same way anymore. It wasn't as sharp, as overwhelming. It was just a thought that passed through and left, and that was a huge shift, because it meant I was no longer controlled by it. And months went by like this, each one building on the last, and for the first time in a long time, I felt stable, not perfect, not completely healed, but stable enough to keep moving forward. And then something unexpected happened. I got an opportunity, a small one, but significant enough to matter. It wasn't something I would have even considered applying for before, because I wouldn't have believed I had a chance, but this time I applied anyway, without overthinking it. And when I got the response, it didn't feel real at first, not because it was huge, but because it was proof that my efforts were leading somewhere, that I wasn't just going through the motions. And that moment, as small as it might seem to someone else, meant everything to me, because it showed me that I wasn't stuck anymore, that I had moved from that lowest point to somewhere better, somewhere with direction. And that realization changed the way I saw everything, including the breakup, because for the first time, I didn't see it as just something that broke me. I saw it as something that forced me to change, something that pushed me into becoming someone I might not have become otherwise. And that didn't mean it didn't hurt anymore, it just meant it wasn't pointless. And that perspective made it easier to let go of the resentment, the blame, the constant questioning, because I no longer needed answers from the past to move forward. I was already moving, already building something new, and the more I focused on that, the less power the past had over me. And without realizing it, I had reached a point where my life didn't revolve around what I had lost, but around what I was creating, and that's when everything truly started to change. By the time I realized how far I had come, it didn't feel like some big victory moment. It was quieter than that, almost subtle, Like noticing one day that the weight you've been carrying for so long doesn't feel as heavy anymore, and you can finally breathe without thinking about it. And what surprised me the most was how normal everything started to feel. Not extraordinary, not perfect, just stable in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. My days had structure, my mind wasn't constantly pulling me back into the past, and for the first time in a while, I felt present in my own life instead of stuck in memories of something that was already over. And with that stability came a new kind of confidence, not the loud, show-off type, but a quiet one, the kind that comes from knowing you've handled something difficult and survived it. And that confidence started showing in small ways, the way I spoke, the way I carried myself, the way I stopped second-guessing every decision I made. And people noticed, not in a dramatic way, but in subtle reactions. Conversations felt easier, interactions felt more natural, and I wasn't constantly worried about being judged or compared, because I wasn't measuring myself against others the way I used to. I was focused on my own path, and that shift made everything feel lighter. And as my routine became stronger, my goals became clearer. I wasn't just trying to fix my life anymore. I was building it, intentionally, step by step. I invested more time into my work, took on challenges I would have avoided before, and started thinking long-term instead of just trying to get through the day. And with that came results, real, tangible results that I could see and feel. My work started getting recognized, opportunities started opening up, and for once it didn't feel like luck, it felt earned, like a direct result of the consistency I had built over months. And that feeling is hard to describe, because it's not just about success, it's about proving something to yourself, proving that you're capable of more than you thought, that you're not defined by your lowest moments, and that realization changes the way you see everything, including yourself. And somewhere along this journey, I stopped needing validation from anyone else, not from friends, not from strangers, and definitely not from her. And that was important, because for a long time, a part of me had imagined a moment where she would see me again, see how much I had changed, and regret leaving. And I won't lie, that thought had motivated me in the beginning, even if I didn't admit it to myself. But as time went on, that motivation faded, replaced by something more genuine. I wasn't doing any of this for her anymore. I was doing it for me, because I liked the person I was becoming. And that made a huge difference, because it meant my progress wasn't dependent on anyone else's reaction. It was mine, completely. And then, almost a year after everything ended, life decided to test that growth in the most unexpected way. I ran into her, not planned, not anticipated, just one of those random moments that feels almost unreal. And for a second, everything slowed down, not in a dramatic sense, but in that quiet, surreal way where your mind tries to catch up with what's happening. And when she looked at me, I could see it immediately, the surprise, the curiosity, maybe even a bit of disbelief, because I wasn't the same person she had left behind. And I don't just mean physically, although yes, I had changed in that way too. I looked healthier, more confident, more put together. But the real difference was in how I carried myself. There was no hesitation, no insecurity, no need for approval, just a calm presence that I had built over time. And we talked casually at first, asking each other how things were, what we had been up to. And it felt strange, not awkward, just different, like talking to someone who used to know everything about you but now knows almost nothing. And as the conversation went on, I could tell she was trying to understand what had changed. She asked about my work, my routine, my plans, things she never seemed that interested in before. And I answered honestly, not trying to impress her, not downplaying anything either, just being real. And I think that's what stood out the most, because there was no need to prove anything. And at some point, she said something that would have meant everything to me a year ago. She said she was proud of me, and I remember pausing for a second, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I realized I didn't need that anymore. It was nice to hear, but it didn't define how I felt about myself. because I had already built that pride internally, through every small step, every difficult day, every moment where I chose to keep going instead of giving up. And then she said something else, something that felt even more familiar. She said she missed what we had, and for a brief moment, I felt that old pull, that sense of comfort mixed with nostalgia, but it didn't take over the way it used to, because I could see it clearly now, not just the good parts, but everything, the timing, the distance, the way things had fallen apart, and more importantly, I could see who I had become after it, and I knew that going back wouldn't make sense, not because she was a bad person, but because that version of us belonged to a different time, a different version of me, and I had moved forward, not just in circumstances, but in mindset, in self-worth, in how I approached life, and going back would mean ignoring all of that, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore, so I smiled, genuinely, and told her I was glad she was doing well, and that I hoped things worked out for her, and that was it. No dramatic speech, no confrontation, just a quiet, respectful closure that didn't need anything more, and as I walked away, I paid attention to how I felt, expecting maybe some lingering sadness or regret, but there was none of that, just a calm sense of clarity, like closing a chapter without needing to reread it again, and in that moment, I realized something that tied everything together. I hadn't come back to show her anything, I hadn't built my life to prove a point, I had done it for myself, and the life I had now, the mindset, the growth, the direction, it wasn't something she couldn't imagine because it was extraordinary, it was something she couldn't imagine because it came from a version of me she had never seen, a version that only existed because I had gone through that lowest point and chosen to rise from it, and that made it mine in a way nothing else could be. And as I kept walking, I didn't look back, not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need to anymore. My life was ahead of me now, and for the first time, I was fully ready for it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more real story.